Welcome to the Daily Tanya. Today is Sunday, the 24th day of Sivan, and let's begin with tzedakah. V'deila tzedakah shemakareves as geula. Tzedakah brings Mashiach closer. And we are in the middle of chapter 7 in Shar, Hayichud, והאמונה. The Alter Rebbe talks today about the topic of tzimtzum shelo kipshuto, that a contraction is not literal. The contraction, the condensing of God's light, so to speak, is not literal. What does that mean? So in the earlier days, in the time of the Alter Rebbe, there's a statement from the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak, that he explained this concept, the doctrine of tzimtzum, the doctrine of contraction. And in general, we spoke about it many times. The idea that Hashem condensed his light in order to create this world, this physical, limited world. And there's many levels, many worlds. One level to the next level becomes less and less godliness revealed. However, the Arizal does say, he mentions that in the beginning, there was the tzimtzum harishon, the first tzimtzum, the first contraction. And that was that Hashem removed his light in order to make place for physical limited creation to come, limited worlds. And there were some of the sages in the time of the Alter Rebbe that took this to mean literal. That Hashem is not really, he removed his light, so to speak. So he removed himself, and he's like as if like a king watching from above, watching from afar. That is not really involved in all the lowest levels of the world. And they said, because you can actually see in the halacha, it said that in certain places you're not supposed to say God's name. Places like not clean places, a toilet, things like that, you're not supposed to mention God. So they said in a place like that, God removed himself from this place. And it allowed the world to be there. And he's watching it from above. And Alter Rebbe says that this was a big mistake, and Hashem will forgive them for this mistake. But he explained based on what we learned. He says, first of all, Alter Rebbe had from tradition, from his teachers, that when we're saying what the Arizal says, that tzimtzum, that Hashem, the first removal, Hashem removed his light, it was, from our perspective, a removal, not literal. And the Alter Rebbe says that this also, he says, can be explained logically. And we see it also in the Zohar. It brings proof from the original writings of the Kabbalah. And today we're learning about the logical part of it. And what the Alter Rebbe, what he's saying is based on what we explained, that Hashem is everywhere. That for Hashem, when Hashem knows us, his knowledge, based from what the Maimonides explained, that his knowledge with him is one. Hashem, the oneness, the unity of God is not a composite unity. It's not compounded with other things. But if you know something outside of yourself, there's two things that come together. But Hashem and his knowledge is one. And therefore, every little last creature in this world that Hashem knows, he knows it because he knows himself. So certainly Hashem is present in every created being. And he says that the idea of removal cannot be attributed to God, because the removal is a physical act. Just like you're going to say 2 + 2 = 4. I'm going to take this and I'm going to go to another city. Over there, is it going to be 2 plus 2? Will it still equal 4? It's not about space. It is a different, it's something which is not dealt with the concept of space. And certainly when we're talking about Hashem that is beyond everything, so this, the concept of removal cannot be attributed to God. So let's see inside, we'll get a little smarter. Again, it's a very deep topic, as we said, but like we did until now, trying to understand as much as we can. Says the Alter Rebbe, "V'hine mikan," in the light of what has been said above, that God's knowledge is wholly one with God Himself. For otherwise, it would imply multiplicity in one who is a perfect unity. Hashem is a perfect unity. If you say that God knows something outside of Him, then it's not, then the thing that He knows, it adds to Him. And that is not possible to say about God. So understanding this, says Alter Rebbe, we can understand the mistake that those sages made. It is possible to understand the error of certain scholars in their own eyes. May God forgive them, or even those who have erred unwittingly are in need of atonement. They erred and misinterpreted in the study of the writings of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, of blessed memory. And they understood the doctrine of Tzimtzum, which is mentioned therein. They understood it literally. So in the writing of the Arizal, it is stated that in the beginning, before creation, the infinite Ein Sof light filled all space. And there was no room for the creation of finite worlds. For inasmuch as worlds are by definition finite, whereas the divine light is infinite, there is no room within the infinite for finitude. How then did the finite world come into being? How did they come into being? So the Arizal explains this through the doctrine of Tzimtzum. The Ein Sof light departed, meaning it ceased to be revealed. So that infinity was no longer in a state of revelation, and all that remained revealed was the power of finitude. This power does allow for the creation of finite worlds. The scholars in their own eyes, they misunderstood this mere concealment to mean literal departure. So it says, "Shakadosh Baruch Hu silik atzmo yimeusay chas v'sholom me'olam hazeh." That the Holy One, blessed be He, removed Himself and His essence, God forbid, from this world. Meaning that He literally removed His presence, rather than merely concealing it. And what they said is that Hashem watches from above. And only guides from above with individual providence all the created beings which are in the heavens above and on earth below. So they thus envisage God as a king who sits in his palace, although his gaze extends beyond its confines. The king himself is not to be found there. In the same way, So they would say, God gazes from above on all created beings, which are found, heaven forfend, outside his palace. So the Alter Rebbe says that's impossible to say. That's ridiculous. He says, number one, the concept of contraction, removal, is an instant of corporal phenomena. It's not something you say about God, which is beyond it. It says, "Ve'inei milvad she'i efshar klal lo yimar inyan hatzimtzum kepshuto yishehu mimikri haguf al HaKadosh Baruch Hu anivdal mehem riboy ravav avdalas en kates." Now, apart from the fact that it is altogether impossible to apply the doctrine of tzimtzum literally, for that would be an instance of corporal phenomena. To the Holy One, blessed be He, who is set apart from them by infinite myriads of separations. If we're saying about a concept, an idea, an intellectual idea, and to not to remove it, that we cannot remove it from one place to another place, this is because between the intellect and physical space, there is a difference, there's a vast difference. But this is only one tiny difference compared to the myriads of separations from us to Hashem, endless separations. One who is subject to the characteristic of a physical body can be said to undergo actual tzimtzum, contraction, a removal, and to depart. Previously he was here, and now he is not. It goes without saying that this cannot be ascribed to God, who is infinitely removed from the phenomena of corporality. Apart from all of the above. So besides that, says the Alter Rebbe at this point, that we cannot ascribe to God this concept of removal, he says that also doesn't make sense, because they do believe that God watches everything and he knows everything. And based on what we explained from the Maimonides, that knowing the knowledge of God is one with Hashem himself, that means that Hashem is in every single creature. In this thing itself, they also do not speak wisely. Since they are believers, sons of believers, that the Holy One, blessed be He, knows all the created beings in this lower world and exercises His providence over them. Thus, they themselves admit that God's knowledge and providence extend to this physical world. And perforce, meaning, you must say, that his knowledge of them does not add plurality and innovation in him, for he knows all by knowing himself. It's not a separate thing. As it were, his essence and being and his knowledge of created beings are all one, as we explained from the Maimonides, what we accept. Since God's knowledge and providence extend to this world, and since his knowledge is one with him, it follows that God himself is to be found within this physical world. Unlike the king who sits in his palace and gazes beyond its walls, the king himself is to be found wherever his providence and knowledge are found. True enough, it is only through divine service that this world may be transformed into a place in which God is revealed. Nonetheless, God is present in this lowly corporal world, which feels itself to exist independently of him, to the same degree as he's present within the higher spiritual worlds. So what does it mean that Hashem removed himself, but he's still here? So just a little of an example to understand a little bit this concept is when sometimes you have a scholar, a big scholar who is very brilliant scholar, a teacher, and he tries to reveal a very deep subject, but he's speaking to first graders. So what is he going to do? He's going to put it in words that don't reveal much. They reveal his concept. And he gives a metaphor, gives an example. And these words that he uses, they do two things. They reveal something of what he's teaching, but do they really reveal the depth of his teachings? Absolutely not. When the student hears an example, a metaphor, the child hears a metaphor, a nice story. So those words, they on the one hand, they reveal his message because the metaphor carries the depth. And for the teacher himself, that depth is still there. In these words, it's not concealing for the teacher. It is nevertheless concealing from the student. It's too much light. So those words that he's using is, on the one hand, it's concealing, and the other hand, it's revealing. It's revealing and concealing this in the same time. So the teacher can remove from the student some and yet be there at the same time, because he's there, but not revealed. Ultimately, when Mashiach comes, that will truly be revealed. As we say, Hashem Echad Shmo Echad. But until then, what we must know is that although we will live sometimes, find ourselves in darkness, dark places, dark situations, we must know that Hashem is there fully. So the Tzimtzum is lo kipshuto. That God's removal of himself is not literal, because God is literally within us, within every one of us. So this is the end of today's Shiur. Mitzvah Hashem. We'll continue tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.